Good morning, Streakers. How are you? Today, Jami and I are going to be talking about daily, weekly, and monthly streaks and what the difference is and why it's important. So let's get streaking. What is streaking and why should you do it?
Streaking is how you set up personal winning streaks. Look at who you want to be and what you need to do to become that person. This is streaking.
I'm Jeff.
And I'm Jami.
And we are streakers. Through 30 years of marriage and 7 children, we have learned the power of consecutive consistency or streaking.
To start streaking is simple. You just follow these 3 laws. Make it laughably simple, keep a record, and join the streaking community.
Streaking is your hidden superpower. With it, you will consistently progress and grow in whatever area of life you want.
In this podcast, Jeff and I will share all the fun, exciting, serious, solemn, wonderful parts of family, spiritual, professional, and personal life, and how streaking powers it all.
So join us in the conversation, join the movement, and start streaking today. Good morning, Jami.
Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Super great. Well, I'm
you are
in
super
between
great because we
great.
just came off a vacation, which was absolutely phenomenal.
I know. So I'm super great because we came off a vacation and I'm like in between because it's like, oh yeah, life. Here we go again. Do you feel that way sometimes?
Yes.
Where you're like, oh, it was so good and we could have just stayed there forever. But I know that's not true. Vacation would not be as good if you actually stayed there forever. Although I haven't tried it, so maybe I should try it to be able to verify if that's true or not.
I think that we should try it. Let's just go on vacation.
I think we should
for a
all
year.
try it. Let's do a year-long vacation so we can truly evaluate the truthfulness of that statement. So I changed my desktop picture to one of the pictures we took in Breckenridge, which was, and Streakers, you'll love this. We walked out onto the balcony and we overlooked Breckenridge, the town, and there was a full rainbow. I mean, a rainbow so prominent. I'd never seen one like it before. And then a second rainbow on top of that, a little bit more faded, but I have it right on my desktop. And I don't think I've ever been what I felt that close to a rainbow.
Neither had I.
Where I was just like, oh my goodness, I literally feel like it's right there.
Yes.
It was amazing.
I felt that was representative of the whole vacation for the hike up to Mohawk Lakes and how beautiful that was. Another hike that we took just outside of shopping in the town.
And this was a fun vacation because we were working around a couple, as our children are more adult children now. A couple of them were working.
We have quite the mixture, don't we?
A new baby, and
yes.
He's a year now. So,
yeah.
So we were working around different schedules, which ended up making it a little bit, I felt like, more relaxed because we were just relaxed around people's schedules. We had decided ahead of time that we weren't going to be too stressed.
What was your favorite, not favorite, there's a lot of favorites, but what was one of your favorite things that we did?
It was actually the night we played Uno.
Oh, really?
As a whole family. I loved it. It was so much fun.
That was pretty intense.
We had some fun.
Now, when we say a whole
rules.
family, there's 13 people.
Yeah.
Including the baby.
He wasn't playing. There was a good portion of us, and it was really, really fun. I enjoyed Uno. And then the hike. I loved. So this hike that we took, Mohawk Lake, was there's 2 lakes that you can get to, and we decided beforehand that we were going to get to the upper lake. And it was so amazing because you do this hike and you hit the lower lake and it's stunningly gorgeous. I mean, just absolutely stunningly gorgeous. And everyone's like, no, you got to get to the second lake. You got to get to the second lake. So we go up to the second lake. And what's so cool about the second lake is that you come up on the path and there's this right before you, just as you emerge out of the path to see the lake, and you kind of don't know what's going to happen. For me, the experience was I was walking through these rocks and then I looked up and literally my eyes are level with the edge of the lake. Like, I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
A natural infinity pool.
Yes. It was so, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the lake. Like it's a
right
very
there.
neat
There it is.
experience.
Love that lake.
It was very cool.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. Absolutely. And so we spent lunch there and that was one of my favorite. But my favorite was when we all took $20 and drew names out of a hat, and we had to go buy something in town for the person whose name we drew out of the hat.
Yes.
And could only spend $20.
And you couldn't tell anybody who you had.
Yeah,
so you had to make the decisions solo.
I won't say that Jami and I cheated a little bit.
I don't remember that.
Exactly. And so each person got some very unique gifts that the person who had their name that's what they thought of or remembered them by. And so Rose, she gave me this beautiful wooden spatula that was multicolored. Actually, it was great representation because it reminded me of the rainbow that we had seen. Just absolutely beautiful, that perfectly described what I was feeling, what she was feeling in regards to being together as a family. And I had made pancakes
Yep, that's
the one
what I was
morning,
gonna
which
say.
is one of my signature dishes, is pancakes from scratch. I don't use any of the buttermilk pancake mixes or what's it, Crusties.
You're kind of a pancake snob.
I am a pancake snob.
But that's
it's a great recipe, though.
It is.
I mean, it is a phenomenal recipe that we found many, many years ago. And I've made it for our family
for years and years.
ever since the kids were really tiny.
Yep. Which is why a spatula to our children represents Saturday morning pancakes.
Yeah. So it was wonderful. I mean, we just had a beautiful, wonderful time. Hopefully you have had wonderful streaking summer vacations.
As we're wrapping up this summer and looking forward
and speaking of us wrapping up the summer, we are getting ready to move yet again.
I know.
From Georgia to Colorado, and Colorado now to Utah, where we have our home that will be finished in the next couple of weeks, and we'll move in.
So it's going to be crazy for that. So we're going to be on the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this week we were going to talk about daily, weekly, and monthly streaks.
Yeah.
And I love why we decided to have this as our topic of discussion today.
Yeah.
Because the reason I love it is because it answered a question for me that I've been a little uncomfortable with in streaking.
Yeah.
For 6 years, I've been a little uncomfortable with it. And it was one of those moments when it got answered, it was like, well, duh.
Yeah, it was one of those moments, wasn't it?
Why?
Because we were talking about it as a streaking team. And what had happened is Katie, one of our streakers, was mentioning that a book that she was reading. And the book is by Dr. Alex Korb, The Upward Spiral. And he helps individuals who are working with anxiety and depression a lot. In fact, we're going to have him on the show in just a little while. I'm really excited for that.
Me too.
So The Upward Spiral, Katie loves this book, just said it's one of the greatest books ever written.
And was recommending that we should all read it.
That we should all read it.
That was one of the things that we're talking about. We're like, okay, we should all read it.
So we should all read this. In process of discussing it, we were talking about the pressure that is sometimes felt by daily streaks.
And maybe streaking in general, that people, and we've been asked this, and I've had this thought before too, the pressure of never missing. Because that is what differentiates what we teach in streaking from a lot of other things out there, is that the power of the streak comes from how many times in a row can you keep this going?
Right.
Like not missing.
And hence why law number 1 is firmly in place, which is make it laughably simple, so that the likelihood that you'll continue that streak every single day goes significantly up. But in the case of people who are suffering severe depression or severe anxiety, that may be a little bit even too much,
and
even if it's laughably simple.
Even personality types, this idea of you know having to do something and never missing has been sometimes overwhelming.
And how come it was something that because you felt the pressure of that. However, you have several daily streaks, but you also felt akin to those who are saying, yes, every day is tough.
It's tough. And a little bit like, how do I explain to people why it's okay?
Yeah.
How do I explain that? And so we were talking about that on our streaking meeting, and she had mentioned in his book that he talks about most of the time. Right. So do you want to read a little bit of that passage? Yeah. Actually, we'll probably spend most of the time talking about it.
Absolutely. Because what happened, and we'll take you a little bit through the conversation as we went through the conversation, so that the discovery can be, hopefully as you listen, the discovery will come along just as it did for us. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about most of the time. And by the way, we have a whole streaking team on. We're talking about streaking methodology as well as the app and everything else. And our developer, his name is Cam, one of our developers, his name is Cam, brought this out. Now, I won't say what it was that he brought out, but it was the light bulb moment.
Right.
But before we get to that, let's go to a little bit about what Dr. Alex Korb had written in The Upward Spiral. Now, just to be fully transparent, I have not read the book yet.
I haven't read the whole book yet either. No. But we're going to.
We're going to. I've only looked at a couple of different sections that we had referenced in our streaking meeting. And so I'm going to share those with you. And Jami and I will talk about this as we read along. So it's a passage that spans a couple of pages, and we're going to talk about and interrupt one another as we go along on this. So Accept that you won't be perfect. Isn't that the great title? That's what we're
great.
talking about right there.
Acceptance.
Acceptance.
Don't block it. Just
That's
accept
right. Yes.
that you're not going to be perfect. Okay, I accept that.
Interesting, though, that accepting that we won't be perfect in streaks, though, there's many that I am perfect in, that I've done every single day, that I've written at least a sentence. I've flossed my teeth a couple of times. Those, I mean, I feel 100% on those.
That's great.
So
perfection is such an interesting word.
It really is, isn't it?
Because sometimes you can define it and say, yeah, I'm perfect in that thing. But a lot of times I feel like it's something that is more elusive, maybe even sometimes a moving target.
I think that we can be perfect in inputs and imperfect in outputs.
That's a really good way to say it.
And so separating
strive
those two
to be perfect in the inputs.
Right.
But
and we're going to share the secret of how that
we
happens.
will be imperfect
in
the outputs.
And that will be shown through. Okay, so in a commencement address in 2012, author and graphic novelist, this is straight from the book, The Upward Spiral by Dr. Alex Korb. Novelist Neil Gaiman made the keen observation that, quote, if you're making mistakes, outputs, it means you're out there doing something.
So I totally agree with that.
I do too. I don't disagree.
And I agree that, and I think that's part of, I think it's important for us to recognize that it takes courage to be out there doing stuff, because it does mean you're going to make mistakes. And the only way to not make mistakes is to choose to just not do anything.
Exactly.
And that is a choice. There's times that, I mean, I know there's times in my life that I've been like, I'm just not going to do anything because I don't want to make that mistake.
Not going to go after that.
Not going to go after it. But and so being able to be more conscious and accept right out of the chute that making mistakes means that you are putting yourself out there.
Yeah. And what I look at it too, as far as what are the mistakes are the ones that are usually outwardly seen. That's typically the mistake we're talking about. The basket, the ball doesn't go in the basket. I trip and I fall. All of those are outward manifestations of what you're trying to accomplish inward.
But even as you continue to read further, I do feel like he talks about a lot of kind of the self-talk that we have, and that we can make mistakes in that too.
True.
And recognizing that and allowing that to be like, you know what, that was a mistake and I want to improve on that.
Yeah. One of the things as I continue to read here, he makes use of the word habit quite liberally here. Now, we're going to talk about what the difference between the habit and the streak, and what those things and why that's important as we go along here. But as we read it, just know that we will also talk about where the streaks are. And the reason I say that is, he says, after reading that, if you're making mistakes, it means you're out there doing something. Changing habits does not require that you make zero mistakes. Interesting, again, inputs versus outputs. In fact, mistakes are almost inevitable. As I said above, habits are created by repetition, that is, by practice. And he italicizes the word practice. You continually practice your habits the same way LeBron James continually practices his jump shot. Because it's practice, it makes sense that you'll make mistakes, lots of mistakes, particularly in the beginning. Now, I have to pause here, because this is typically where most individuals start to make a correlation between habits and activities that you do on a consecutive basis that isn't true. In other words, what he is talking about here is the habit of making a jump shot. LeBron James practices that every day so that the motor skills become automatic. How he holds his elbow, how he puts the ball in the air, how he flips his wrist, how it rolls off of his fingers. All of those things are motor skills. So he's not thinking about those as he makes the shot. That is a habit. Agreed. 100%. It's a motor skill that your prefrontal cortex, which we'll talk about in just a second, does not have to devote a lot of energy to, because all of that has moved to the basal ganglia, and now I don't have to put energy toward thinking about that thing. However, the practice that he's talking about here is a streak, because you absolutely have to, in every way, make a decision that I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this every single day, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, to me, it's the decision to practice is a decision.
Every time.
Every time.
That will never be automatic.
The the way that he's practicing over time can become automatic.
Right.
The things that he's not, and by automatic, what do we mean? He's not thinking about where he's holding his elbows or those things do start to become automatic.
Yes.
But there'll always be parts of that he will be thinking about. Mm-hmm. And that's the part
to actually practice. Mm-hmm. He will. So he goes on, Dr. Korb goes on to say this: old habits persist because of striatum activity. Fortunately, when you want to create a new good habit, like going to the gym or eating healthier, see, now I would say that that's a streak, not a habit, because you're not going to get up and just go to the gym, and you're not going to get up and just and eat healthier.
Do you have that? You explained what striatum is? Do you have that?
Oh
also?
yeah, let me put that in there, because that is a critical one as well. The striatum, or corpus striatum,
and I'm sorry ahead of time because I'm going to ask you to read all of those big medical words. Keep going.
is a nucleus in the subcortical basal ganglia of the forebrain.
Okay.
So basal ganglia again is where, well, it'll explain it here. The striatum is a critical component of the motor and reward systems. Receives glutamatergic and dopaminergic inputs from different sources, and serves as the primary input to the rest of the basal ganglia. Functionally, the striatum coordinates multiple aspects of cognition, including both motor and action planning, decision-making, motivation, reinforcement, and reward perception.
Okay.
So that's the striatum activity.
So when he says bad habits are often in place because of the striatum activity, yeah. Activity, okay. Great, thank you.
Old habits persist because of the striatum activity. And it's not necessarily bad habits. It's just
did
old
I say
habits.
bad? It's
you
old.
did.
Okay.
It's old habits.
It's old habits.
It could be bad or good.
Right.
Or I like to often look at it and say there's less valuable and more valuable. There are bad habits, and then there's less valuable and more valuable. But let's just get very clear on the definition of a habit is something you do automatically without thinking. Mm-hmm. And that's motor skills.
Right.
Motor skills are what you do automatically without thinking. The metaphor I use the most is typing on a keyboard. Mm-hmm. The decision to write a sentence is a decision you'll make every time. That's a streak. And if I have a streak to write at least one sentence daily, that's a decision that I will make every single day. Now, it's easy to make that decision because it's one sentence.
Right.
Even if the sentence is I'm tired, that's the sentence.
And it does become easier over time with repetition.
Right.
I truly believe that and have seen that in my own life. However, it is not something that I can stop thinking about and it will continue.
Right.
Without me. Eventually it will stop.
It will stop. Whereas the typing on the keyboard, where my fingers will go or fly across the keyboard in order to type the correct letter, that has become automatic. Mm-hmm. I don't think about that at all. And in fact, when I did think about it, all the way back in 8th grade when I had my typing class, yes, I put a lot of devoted effort and repetition into moving that into the basal ganglia, so I no longer had to think about where my four fingers were flying and when my thumb pressed the space key.
Right.
It basically happens. But the decision to write a sentence every day, that is a streak. And once people understand the difference between the two, you're empowered.
Truly. We've heard that so many times and have felt it in our own experiences.
Man. Yeah.
Is that once you understand, because what happens, so the reason he's talking about this is saying, okay, you have things you want to change. Some things that you need to change are things that you're maybe doing without realizing that you're doing it. And he's saying, this is why this is happening. And then some
things...
So
let me read that part real quick, because it says, the problem is that the prefrontal cortex can only override, so it can override insofar as it's paying attention, and it's impossible for your prefrontal cortex to be eternally vigilant.
So what's saying is that there's these things that you are possibly doing automatically without thinking about it, and you want to override those, which is totally possible with the frontal cortex.
Right.
But that frontal cortex prefrontal cortex has to be paying attention.
Yeah.
In other words, there has to be intentionality to it.
Absolutely. And that is the streak. Mm-hmm. And what you do to make the streak successful is you make it laughably simple.
Right.
So that when you're paying attention to it, because now you get into executive brain function or executive functions and task initiation, the harder you make a task to initiate, the more difficult it will be to complete it. So what you do is make the task initiation laughably simple.
Right. Very simple to get started. Okay.
And in starting it that simple, that means then that you can complete it. And I think the other thing too, which is what he's referencing, is giving yourself permission to do the laughably simple and only the laughably simple on that day.
Yes. And that is something that I think can be very hard for people at the beginning of streaking.
Oh, yeah.
Because oftentimes when you're reading a book and you're motivated to change, or something in your life has happened and you feel that motivation to change, you want to change. The motivation is high. There's desire there. The idea of making that change by doing something laughably simple seems demotivating sometimes, where you're just like, but no,
Or
I'm going to
impossible.
be.
Yeah.
Well, it just seems like it's not going to make enough difference. You're like, no, I'm motivated. I'm going to make a change. I'm going to be
make
bigger,
a big
better.
Change. Huge.
This is going to happen this time, because that motivation is there, which is great. Capitalize on that motivation. What streaking does is take in the reality, the accepting that not every day you're going to have that level of motivation. But you still need to accept that in order to get better at these things, it takes practice, it takes repetition. So how do you do that? How do you account for those days when the repetition and the practice are essential, but the motivation isn't there?
Yeah.
That's where the streak
That's
really
where
comes
the
into
streak
play.
comes into
where
play.
that laughably simple initial task initiation is so simple that there's no excuse inside of you to not do it.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'm just going to do this
Gonna
much.
make it.
And then amazing how often you do a little bit more. And even if you don't do as much as you do on your really great days, you did more than what you would have done on your really bad days.
Right.
And that's what's important. That's
Absolutely.
where the success comes in.
Because you're consecutive. Doing it once, you're right, won't make any difference. Doing it every day, 100 days in a row, 300 days in a row, makes all the difference.
Right. All right, keep going.
It has a lot to do and only so many resources for paying attention.
And this is the frontal cortex.
This is the prefrontal cortex.
Thank you.
When you stop paying attention because of distraction or stress, the striatum takes over, and you don't realize it until you're halfway through that pint of Cherry Garcia. Can't stand Cherry Garcia, but
that's okay.
a lot of people do.
It's ice cream.
Think of your striatum as a dog that needs to be trained.
So I really liked this analogy.
Yeah.
Keep going.
If you leave a plate of cookies sitting out on the coffee table and a dog eats them, you can't really get mad at the dog. That's what dogs do. What did you expect? If you were standing there staring at your dog the whole time, maybe the cookies would be safe, but eventually your phone would ring and you'd have to go to work. It's the same with your brain. If you haven't trained your striatum to stop eating cookies, what exactly are you expecting will happen when your prefrontal cortex stops watching?
And I've experienced this so many times. I think everyone has, where that motivation and that desire is right there, and you're going to do it. And especially, I love that he's talking about eating, because I think that's the thing that most of us can identify with so easily, is that when you're on and everything's going as planned, you can do it. But the minute something doesn't go as planned, that's when everything just falls apart. And so I love that he's like, well, what did you expect to happen?
Right, exactly. And what I see here as well is if you were standing there paying attention to the dog, so that's what the streak does, is it gives you the reason to pay attention.
And it gives
for example, go ahead.
Well, it makes paying attention possible. You don't have to be paying attention
And
24/7.
Possible and probable.
Possible and probable. All you have to do is say at least this many times, at least today.
I'm going to have at least one vegetable daily.
Yeah, I'm going to pay attention at least this amount.
Uh-huh.
And then that gives you a place to start, and you get better.
It reminds me of when we were talking to Megan Summerell, and one of the streaks that she recommended was to intentionally put down your phone at least one time daily.
Exactly.
Pay attention. Because your motor skills, I do not disagree that your motor skills can take over. And phone to eyes, phone to ear, whatever that is, that's a motor skill. And if I'm not actively paying attention, I can be picking that up and looking at something before I even realize it, because it's a motor skill.
And I love if you take that, I like that streak. So you set that streak to intentionally put my phone down once a day. And you set it as a streak. I would suggest that probably the first several days, if maybe not weeks, you might be doing that streak at night before you go to bed when you're reviewing your streaks and you're like, oh, that's right, I was going to set my phone down once a day. So you pick it up and you put it down. People might think that's dumb. You're not doing anything. But what you are is you are bringing that little bit to the foreground. Your prefrontal cortex in that moment overrode something else. You brought it to the attention.
Yeah.
You do that for a little while, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if it's all of a sudden, but you go through a day and the thought comes, oh, I'm going to put my phone down now instead of waiting. Now that's jumped from something you weren't thinking about at all. You had to have some kind of a reminder, some kind of a thing at the end of the day that you read that you're like, oh yeah, I got to put my phone down. Now, because you've been doing that, it jumped to sometime in the middle of the day where you're like, oh, I'm going to put my phone down now and put that streak together. Next thing you know that happens is you're struggling with something and you've been putting your phone down a little bit every day. Now the thought goes through your head. You're like, you know what? I can put this down. I can resist this. I don't need to do this. Now you've jumped to another higher level of being able to say, this isn't as hard. I can do this.
And what I see is the habit is falling out of the streak. The streak is the thing that you keep alive. You keep a record of it. It's laughably simple. And you join the streaking community to share your success. And what then happens is what you were mentioning, that the phone, what you're recognizing is, you know what, I'm putting that down more automatically because it's the motor skill that I'm doing it. However, like you said, it is the deliberate decision of keeping that streak alive that allows you to make that happen.
So at the beginning, that decision takes a lot of reminding, so to speak. You're like, oh, I need something to remind myself. 2. Exactly. You have to keep a record. Oh yeah, I need to do that. As you get better at it, it starts to become something that does become more a part of your day and more a part of your decision process throughout the day. But that only happens because you've had that streak building. You've had that thing, that framework that allows you to practice through the beginning when it is difficult to add something new, when the distractions are many.
And there are times where once the streak has served its purpose, you may retire that streak, and that's fine.
You may. But I was thinking about it, and I thought, honestly, if I had that streak, put my phone down once a day, I would probably keep that streak because I know. So for example, I'll take a streak that I have not yet set, but that you have, which is to keep track of the calories you eat each day. And it's interesting because your streak is not to live within a certain caloric intake. It's just to record
every
just
calorie
to record the calories.
Yep.
And even in that, I would say that you are what's the word? Liberal. It doesn't have to be super exact. It's just, this is what I ate. This is roughly the calories that I consume.
So I can record it very quickly and it's done. I just record, I did all these things and I may be off by, I may be plus 20 calories or less 20 calories, whatever it is. I don't really care, but I record every single day.
Yes. I have realized that I can go several weeks of recording my calories and then have a little while that I'm like, yeah, and I don't do it. Whereas if I had a streak, I know I would keep doing it. And so it's an interesting thing that even, and I wonder if the same with you, if you were to retire that streak now,
I wouldn't.
You'd probably keep them for a little while, but over time, it would be something that just falls off because it's not a part of the streak anymore. Yeah. So that's where I look at it and I think you can get to the point that these things become easier, but I generally believe that a lot of times, if it's something that you want to still be consistently and consecutively in your life, it does require that streak because it will stop. Even after repeated and repetition and lots of practice, over time, it will stop happening.
Yeah, that's very true. Great point. So as he goes on here, so we're going to get to the place where we're talking about in our streaking meeting as far as daily, weekly, and monthly streaks. And he goes on to say this. Often when we try to start a good habit and then slip up, we describe it as a failure of willpower. But sticking to a good habit is not simply a matter of willpower. And what I would say is sticking to a streak is where you need to be. It's because I think what's being intentioned here and why people feel that they fail is because it didn't become automatic. And what you just described is one of the areas where streaking helps so significantly is I'm not expecting it to ever be automatic.
And I think two things. I think one, we expect it to be automatic. And two, we expect the level of improvement to always be better. I should always be getting better at this. We don't want those days that we're not good at it. We want it to always be improving if it's something that, and so what a streak does for me is, because read again what he said, we
often when we try to start a good habit and then slip up, we describe it as a failure of willpower.
So willpower. Streaking takes out the requirement that the willpower be the thing that you're dependent upon, because I feel like willpower fluctuates. And I think he goes on to talk about this, about willpower requires a certain level of serotonin, and that fluctuates.
You have willpower only insofar as your prefrontal cortex is paying attention and has enough serotonin to work properly.
Exactly. So you have to be paying attention and you have to be in a good mood. That's a good day, but it's not happening all the time.
Right.
Whereas a streak is saying you're going to pay attention, but you don't have to be in a good mood
because if it's the laughably simple, it's okay. So I got to share a story on this. Jami and I have a streak that we share together, which is to pray at least once as a couple daily. And there are times when we are at it and we are just full on fighting and just have a full disagreement. It's the end of the day.
We're usually
tired. We haven't said our prayer yet. We're tired and everything else. And the last thing that I want to do is pray with you. I'm sorry about that, honey, but that's true. I don't know if you've ever felt that way about me.
First thing I want to do is turn my back and be done with you.
Yes.
But no.
However, because we have the streak, and it is laughably simple. It's just say a prayer. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be involved. It's just to say a prayer.
It doesn't even have to be sincere, to be honest.
I know. Sorry, Lord.
It just has to be. We just have to do it.
In other words, my serotonin levels and my good mood are not at their peak efficiency levels.
Right.
Yet, because we have the streak and we want to keep it alive, we'll both acquiesce to that streak, hold hands. Well, actually, hold hands, touch one another, and say a prayer. And you know what's amazing about that is when we've done that, how my heart has changed or how I've been softened a little bit. And we still worked through what it was that we were disagreeing. However, the streak lived on, and the streak aided us in winning together without the willpower. I had the exactly opposite.
Yeah. My willpower was in the opposite direction, and it was strong. What's great about that is that it hits those two things, that the prefrontal cortex, the streaking gives you the framework to consciously engage that prefrontal cortex, where it's like, okay, I'm going to choose to pay attention. And streaking allows you to do that.
Right.
And then that task initiation happens and you're like, okay, we did it. And that's hard sometimes to overcome a lot of those emotions and those feelings. And it allows for that to happen.
He says, yes, and this is now deciding that you want to do things differently is an important first step. For streaking as well. I mean, what streak do I want to put in place? But your striatum doesn't care that much about what you want. It cares about repetition or streaking.
Okay.
And this is where we got to. You won't succeed 100% of the time, or even maybe most of the time. But getting upset with yourself does not help the process of retraining the brain. It hinders it. Those feelings of frustration or self-judgment are all sources of stress, making it more likely that you'll keep doing your old habits. The key to change comes in the moment after you realize you didn't enact your intended habit. And there's the mix of words here
I know.
Is quite significant. So let's separate out just a little bit streak and habit. So one of the things that a lot of people have worried about is I'm going to fail at an everyday streak, even if it is laughably simple.
Right.
And Dr. Korb talks about in depression and anxiety, how important it is to be able to have successes. And that if you have an everyday, when you are in the depths of despair or in the grips of anxiety, how difficult that can be to have an everyday thing.
Right.
And so in our streaking meeting, we were talking about most of the time. And this is where we got to the point where you and I and the whole team were just lamenting the fact and saying, well, how do you represent this? What do you do for most of the time?
This?
How do you reconcile this? Because we're such big believers that you can do something 100% of the time.
And it was an interesting conversation for me because I could see both sides of it, where I was like, okay, I can see I don't want to put pressure on people who are already in a fragile state. But he's saying successes are important. And I'm like, but I've had such success with a streak. How do I reconcile this? So there was a part of me that was like, is it wrong to have it be this every day, or this consecutive, this stick to it where it's like, no, you don't miss. So I was conflicted. I've had this question a lot.
And we all were talking about it. And we've talked about consecutive streaks and can they be consecutive streaks like on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday, or in a certain way. And we were talking about most of the time. And we were debating this and moving it around. And then Cam,
who's one of our developers,
and
pretty chill, doesn't say much, said, well, we do have a most of the time streak. And we all, it was like one of those moments where we all paused. And it was interesting because one of the things that we've talked about is there are a lot of programs and apps out there that say you've had a streak for 80% of the time.
Right.
And we've talked about that, but we've felt so strongly that the power of the streaking methodology is in the consecutiveness of it.
And 100% of the time.
100% consecutiveness. So that's where, when he's like, well, we have a most of the time.
We have most of the time streak. And we're like, huh? What? And he goes, weekly streaks. And he just said it just like that.
He's like, weekly streaks.
And we're like, what do you mean? And all of a sudden we realized, well, you could do something one time or 2 times in a week and do that every week. And guess what?
Well,
you have a weekly streak. You have an every week streak. You have 100% right there. All of a sudden, we're all like, "Duh,
duh." Well, it was a duh moment because we have a weekly streak that we do daily, except for 1 day a week. But it was the first time that I looked at it and thought, "Oh, what if you were like, I want this to be something daily, but I know I can't hold myself to that level yet." So you're like, "Okay, what if I say 3 times weekly?"
Or 1 time weekly, or 2 times weekly,
or
just
whatever.
Make it laughably simple in the sense of when you do it.
And then you're like, so I do it most of the time, but for a weekly streak, if it's twice weekly and I do it twice, I'm 100%.
But think about this, streakers, and this is what we talked about. Think about, I have a 100% weekly streak versus I do this 70% of the time.
Daily. There's a difference there.
There's a big, big difference.
There is a big difference.
And that is critical in your journey and in your success, is to look at it and say, I'm going to do this activity at least 2 times a week. And if you do it more, great. But guess what? You've set up for yourself a floor, and you can, after 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, declare 100% that you've been doing it. And that's a most of the time streak. Now, maybe you'll even say, for example, someone dealing with anxiety or with stress or with depression, maybe they have a streak to smile at least 1 time weekly. And that is their streak. That's what they're going to muster, is I'm going to smile at myself or someone else at least 1 time weekly. So in the mirror, they look at themselves, and 1 time they do it. It's not a daily streak. It's a every week streak. And now look at how that builds up success through time. And the success that you build up brings confidence and credibility because you've been doing it consecutively and you've looked at it and been intentional about it. And that brings about the joy, the happiness.
And that success where you are being successful and you're able to say, okay, I set this standard that I wanted for myself and I am doing it. I'm living up to it. I'm keeping these commitments to myself. There is so much power in that for ourselves.
I want to read just this little part. Yes, you will probably have many slip-ups. Now, I would say in setting your streak correctly, you won't have any slip-ups. Because if let's say you only smile once in a month, great. Set the streak so that you do it so it's laughably simple, and you do that. So he says, but if you give up after a slip-up, and this is where I believe a lot of people have been misled by habits, because they think slip up, rather than success. It says you'll probably hear a little voice inside your head telling you to give up. And by the way, that same little voice, when you've been at it for 10 weeks and have smiled at least once a week in that 10 weeks, that same little voice will say, is this really making any difference?
Right. Or it'll be like, it's once a week.
It's once a week.
Like,
Is it really
why
making
are
any
you
difference?
even proud of yourself for
That's
that?
when you need to smile.
Yep.
Right there. Because keeping the streak alive will then give you the strength that it's your consecutive muscle that you're building. And the consecutive muscle is often overridden by the word habit and by the illusory term of something will become automatic if you do it enough times.
So I guess what we're saying is that the success is in recognizing that you're being intentional. You are choosing to do this all the time. And that choice may get easier over time through practice and repetition, but you are still consciously making that choice. You are keeping that streak alive.
If you listen to that little voice, the more it becomes a habit to listen to the failure voice, and thus harder to resist. Every time you stick to your goals, the voice gets softer. And what I would say here is every time you stick to your streak, that voice gets softer.
And here's what,
see, because goals are different too. Goals are bars that you reach for, and you are going to either succeed or fail at those. But streaks, you can succeed at 100% of the time.
Here's what I love is as you're talking about that, so let's say you're a person that's reading it and you're identifying as the person that's listening to the negative voice inside your head all the time. You're like, yeah, that's the habit I've gotten into. I listen to that negative voice. That's all I hear. I've loved that as I've done streaking more, that becomes to me the place to start, where when I recognize if I'm doing something, so if I'm recognizing I am listening to that negative voice, I have now a way to change that, to start right now. I could set a streak and say, you know what? Once a day, I'm going to try and recognize a time that I heard that negative voice, and I'm going to think differently and think, nope, I'm not going to listen to you. Even if that's your streak, just once a day to say, I'm not going to listen to the negative voice. Now you've set an actionable streak to fight something that is very present, but not always easy to understand how to change. When you're just like, yeah, you listen to that negative voice, I don't know how to change that. You can set a streak to change that.
Yeah,
you can
absolutely.
set a streak to say, I'm going to choose to listen to a positive voice at least once a day.
Right.
My own positive voice at least once a day.
Yep.
Or I'm going to choose to say, I'm not going to listen to the negative voice at least once a day.
Or at least once a week.
Or once a week.
I mean, make it simple.
Yeah.
Make it laughably simple for yourself. Be it the activity that you do on
it could be
every
as
day.
simple as I'm going to identify a time when that was a negative voice. Just identify it. You can just start there.
Right.
You don't even have to do anything with it. You just have to notice that it's there and that when it happened in your day.
The critical portion is follow the laws of streaking, which are make it laughably simple. So laughably simple can be daily laughably simple in the sense of write at least one sentence daily. Or it can be write at least one sentence weekly. So you can increase the time frame in which you can complete the streak. What that does for you, though, is give you 100%. So you talk about most of the time. What you're doing is the activity most of the time, and your streak is perfect.
Yep.
And you record that you've done it, and you share it out there. Join the streaking community. You'll find that there are individuals in the community of streakers in the app. Download the app, and you will see all kinds of wonderful, laughably simple streaks that we all celebrate.
One of my favorite was a woman just a couple days ago that had hit 250 days of read a paragraph in a book. A paragraph. That's it. She was so excited to say,
and we were all so excited for her.
So consistent. I've never been able to say, I've done this for 250 days.
Yeah.
And it does. It changes your perspective, and it changes the way that you approach how you want to improve things in your life.
Absolutely.
And it gives you permission to treat yourself with more kindness and more patience, and to see the successes that you can have and that you are having, to recognize that I'm not going to dramatically change everything about myself or get to this place of perfection. I use that with quotes, perfection. Right away, things take time, repetition, practice, and I can take time to appreciate the success that I'm having along the way.
And you can be perfect in the input. Just make it laughably simple. You can be perfect in that, because it could be once a month, once a week, or every day. And that is where you start to look at and say, I can step this up. Let's say I'm smiling now at least once a week, or I've been doing it 3 or 4 times, and I feel confident and credible because I've been at it for 150, 300 days. Now I'm going to set a daily streak where every day I'm going to smile at least once.
And here's what I loved what you just said about that is that for 300 times, or you said if it was a weekly streak for, 50 weeks now, I've smiled at someone. That's something that you've kept as a part of your life for 50 weeks. That right there is a huge success.
Massive.
That it wasn't something you thought about for a couple months and then because of distraction or depression or stress, it fell off your plate.
Right.
You've been able to keep it a part of your life. And now you're like, okay, I'm ready to maybe make this a daily streak now.
Right. He gives some recommendations as far as being able to increase your serotonin levels, and all of these relate to streaks. Sunlight, massage, exercise, remembering happy memories. Think of a streak like that. I'm going to think of at least one happy memory every week.
That would be really great. The intentionality behind that is inspiring. Mm-hmm. Don't you feel that way?
Oh, I 100%
to be able to look at it and say, I'm going to intentionally remember a happy memory. And then you get better at doing that. I think there's so much power there.
As you look at habits, streaks, and goals, understanding how each of those works is critical to improving behavior and your own behavior and getting massive success and results. Streaks are what you do intentionally, make it laughably simple, keep the record that you've done it. That increases your own self-confidence and credibility, and then join a streaking community so that everyone can celebrate with you. That's the laws of streaking, and that's how it relates to pulling yourself out of anxiety or out of depression, any of those things. And I know that there are other things that make it even more, but this behavioral component, understanding a streak, and you can do a most of the time activity and have a perfect streak, which is every single week, is massive.
I love that. Focus on being perfect on your inputs and accepting the outputs.
You got it. Streakers, we've enjoyed having this conversation with each other and with you. If you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with us, or if you'd like to download the Streaking app and share them there, both are acceptable. If you want to reach out directly to Jami or I, we answer all of our emails. My email address is Jeffrey, Jeffery, at streakingmastery.com.
And I'm Jami, Jami, at streakingmastery.com.
You can also follow us on any of the social media outlets that are out there. Also, the website is thestreakingapp.com. You're certainly welcome to go in there. It will talk about the laws of streaking, highlight some of the streakers that are available. The book is absolutely fabulous to be able to learn about the streaking methodology and how you can start implementing it today. You can buy it anywhere books are sold, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or any, I think we have other third-party stores as well. Also, if you want to follow us on our sister program, if you're interested in a daily program on streaking, Talon and I do the Streaking Professional, which is Monday through Friday, where we'll give you 20 minutes of what's happening in the world and how that relates to streaking. Well, hopefully you have a fantastic weekend and week, or wherever you are in the process. Whatever you do, keep streaking, and
until next time, you just said keep streaking.
I did, didn't I? I said it.
So enjoy
it just
your
came out of my mouth.
Your weekly or your monthly streaks. Keep streaking.
It's the little